Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, How to Engage and Motivate a Team to Overperform, hosted by DHR Global and supported by Hunt Scanlon Media. I'm Suzanne Jacob, Global Chief Marketing Officer at DHR Global, and we are thrilled to have you with us today. In today's session, we're diving into the qualities and strategies that define high-performing teams, with a focus on how companies, especially those in the private equity space, can leverage individual strengths and feedback-driven improvements to drive exceptional results. We have an incredible lineup of panelists who bring a wealth of knowledge and experience in leadership, team dynamics, and performance strategies. Our goal today is to provide you with actionable insights you can take back to your own teams. So as we go through the discussion, please feel free to drop your questions into the Q&A chat, and our team will address as many as possible towards the end of the session. Before we dive in, I'd like to start with brief introductions. We are joined by our three esteemed panelists, starting with Jerry Burris, who is the current president and CEO of Midwest Can Company and serves on the board of two public companies, London-based nVent Electric plc and Mohawk Industries. He has received numerous honors and recognitions, including 2017 Engineer of the Year from Purdue University's School of Electrical and Computer Engineering, and Black Enterprise Magazine's Power in the Boardroom, the Black Corporate Directors of the S&P 500 in 2017 and 2018. Welcome, Jerry.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Ann Sempowski Ward is the chairwoman of the board for Curio Brands and an experienced board director. In her most recent tenure as an operating executive, Ann was CEO of Curio Brands, a private equity-backed portfolio company of beauty, wellness, and home fragrance brands. During her 12-year tenure, both revenue and EBITDA more than quadrupled. Currently, she serves as an independent director of two public companies, SBS Commerce and Vanda Pharmaceuticals, as well as two private companies, Curio Brands and The Lit Bar. Thanks for being with us today, Ann.
Thanks, Suzanne.
And lastly, Victor Swint is president and CEO of Formulated Solutions, where he has crafted and is executing a value creation plan centered on building a world-class team, driving innovation, and achieving operational excellence in quality, customer satisfaction, and new product development. His efforts are transforming the company into a premier provider of innovative pharmaceutical solutions. He's also navigated two successful private equity exits. Welcome, Victor.
Happy to meet you and see you.
Thank you all for joining us for this conversation. Our moderator for today is Dwain Celistan. Dwain is the managing partner and leader of DHR Global's diversity practice and is a member of the firm's North American Marketing Committee. Based in Chicago, he's conducted searches for senior leaders across a range of firms and industries. His clients include Fortune 500 firms, family-owned companies, private equity-backed organizations, and universities. It is my pleasure to hand the conversation over to Dwain, who will guide us through today's discussion. Over to you.
All right. Thanks, Suzanne. And thank you guys for joining us today, both the panelists and those in the audience. So one of the things that is really exciting about this discussion we'll have is a liquidity event. And a liquidity event can either be a recapitalization or a sale, which is what it's all about in the PE world. So first of all, just to calibrate, how many of those events have you led your teams through? So Ann, how many have you had?
Two.
Two? And Victor?
I've had two.
And Jerry?
I've had three, and I'm literally in the process of exiting my portco as we speak.
Awesome. So as you can see, audience, we have people who've actually gotten to the quote unquote promised land for the PE space. So that's why they're on the panel, because they can speak to true successful results, not just process, not aspirations. So this is a question for all of you, and let's start with you, Ann, ladies first. Also an incredible unicorn, a woman in a PE leadership position, and a person of color as well. When you think about the team you started with, you dropped in as the new CEO of this enterprise, and now you're at the liquidity event. Let's look at that as a meaningful endpoint. I know you had multiples, but Is the team that you began the journey with also the team that you ended with in terms of your top leaders?
Yeah, no, not at all. And it's interesting because I'm this, just to give a little context, I ended up through all these exits staying with the same company. So what actually changed in the exits were the PE firms who were back company rather than me specifically. And there were actually a few people on my leadership team who stayed. So that's very rare because usually often in exits, we tend to, as executives and as CEOs, tend to exit right along with the exit for a number of reasons. But so that's an interesting kind of arc. But what I'll say is when I came to the company 12 years ago, and actually I just exited as the CEO and transitioned to the chair of the board about 3 months ago. So this is still very new for me, and I will stay on as the chairperson of the board through the next exit as well. So I will take the company through yet another exit at some point. But I hired, my first hire was my CFO. And that was because I knew that I needed to have a really great partner right alongside me who was the financial aspect of the company, but much more than that, really a business partner. And she stayed for and still is with the company. All of the other executives have changed, and they've changed based on where the company was in its arc. So, the famous saying, what got you here won't get you there. And so as we grew to each stage of the company and as we did each exit, it wasn't just who the team was, it was where we were as a company. And the revenue size, the focus points that we had to drive the strategy and the future of the company. And so each step of the way, I evaluated who the leaders would be that could bring what we needed in that next phase. And an exit is a good time for people to have off ramps potentially, and for people to have on ramps shortly thereafter. So today, if I look at the executive team, really only one person is still remaining from 12 years ago, and everyone else has changed. And in varying forms and with different set of skills. The team itself has grown. A couple of things that have stayed the same. It is still women-led as an executive team, which was very important to me as a woman leader, and most of our stakeholders, consumers and otherwise, were women. But we have changed leaders based on their skill sets.
Thanks, Ann. Jerry, your perspective on that?
Well, I'm an engineer by degree and MBA, and I'm sure Victor could say the exact same thing.
And so can I, Jerry.
And and I spent 21 years at General Electric Company, that little bitty academy company that's kind of known for its training. And I tend to operate with frameworks. And so my framework in the PE world, in the financially sponsored world, is very different than the framework that I use at both GE as well as Barnes Group, which is a publicly traded company. And so what I start with is I do start with the end result. And I've worked for 4 different private equity sponsors. You start with, well, what's the business outcome you desire? And in the private equity space, it's usually communicated in terms of what's our investment thesis. And then my framework is, okay, what's the leadership behaviors or the trader style necessary to get me there? If I'm driving a growth platform, that takes one style of leadership versus if it's a mature business and it requires cost actions, that's a different style of leadership. And then the third factor is the career experiences. What skill set is required in order to get us there? So let me just give you an example. We were looking in our second round of me leading this organization to drive for global growth or international growth. We were looking to expand our platform in terms of driving organic growth through new products that we introduced. So as I looked at my team, I had some skill set gaps there. And I had to go out and partner with a search firm to help me find an engineering leader that had shown proven, you know, adeptness at developing new products. I had to go out and top grade my commercial role with someone who also had experience not only in the US, but in Canada and Mexico and other parts of North America. So you start with the investment thesis that the fund has for how they're going to grow your concern over the 3 to 5 year horizon. You do almost an inventory assessment on your team and whether they can drive you there, and you do that match. Now, I'm a big believer in lean and continuous improvement. And one of the tools that's used in the Lean Sigma playbook is called goal deployment or strategy deployment. And when you use those tools, it'll help you assess skill set gaps. And that becomes the document that the search firm uses to go out and find you the talent necessary to shore up that skill set so you can execute on that investment thesis, or you can execute on that business outcome that you desire.
Jim, thank you so much. Victor.
Well, those are great perspectives. Those were great perspectives. The way I think about it is when a new CEO comes in, there's usually a transformation that has to occur. And Jerry talked about it can be a cost takeout transformation, or it could be a growth agenda. And when I typically come in, I'm looking to build a great business and to transform it from wherever it is. And sometimes it's an average business, and sometimes it's not as good as average. And you look at your team, and then you go through a process of kind of talking about how things are going to be around here, what we stand for, what are our values. And then you begin to work with the team to work on a value creation plan or strategy. And you want to make sure that everybody has a piece of that strategy development process, because that's part of the motivation behind taking a team on the journey. And you assess your team during that process. And one of the things I look for is, have you actually been involved in a transformation of your function? Do you know what great looks like, or good? And do you show the skill sets to be able to roadmap out how to get there if you're not there already? And oftentimes when you're taking over an average business in private equity, you don't see those skill sets. And 3 of the situations that I've been in, including the current one, I've had to change out almost the entire staff, and kind of driving the right kind of skill sets, aggressiveness, and also that transformation capability.
No, that's a great segue into what I'd like to learn next, which is, in your case, you turned the whole leadership team over, an example you just shared. Can you take one of those leaders and walk us through briefly this leader and why, and then what enabled that new leader's team to accelerate to new heights?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in my first the story I always like to talk about is in my first private equity opportunity, I came into a business that was a good business. It had been over 100 years old, but it had been in decline for 4 years in a row under the previous CEO. So when I came in, I assessed the team, and most of the team was not going to make the journey. I pretty much knew that pretty early on. But the glaring opportunity for improvement was in our sales organization. I had not a long-term sales executive, but I read maybe 5 books over the holiday to just learn about sales and sales management and what kind of framework we wanted to use in the company. And once I did that, I started running sales for a while after I let the previous sales leader go. And I partnered up with a search firm and found a sales leader who aligned with my strategy, with what I believe great sales leadership is all about. And we partnered on a growth agenda. And it took about a year for him to go from a company that had been declining for 4 years in a row to growing at double digits. And as a result of that and some good cost takeout action, we were able to exit in about 2.5 years.
So in your case, it was the commercial leader that was your key partner, key position to replace. And how about you? Can you share with us, an individual that you took out and why and what that led to?
Yeah. There are several examples I can give, but the one I'll focus in on is an operational leader. So a chief operating officer or VP of operations is what we had originally. And in this instance, because I acquired, first of all, I acquired my role moving into a company that was already 30 years old. So, but we were incredibly fast growing. And so we had a cadre of employees who had been with the company either since the start of the company or very shortly thereafter. So very tenured employees. And we had a woman who had done a great job leading operations because this business had been built from the ground up, started by two women in a basement and built to the size and scale that it was when I joined. And she had fueled that entire growth by standing up an operation, a distribution operation, all the parts and pieces, putting in an ERP system, all things that happen in an earlier stage of a company. And when I arrived, I realized that our mandate, if you will, or my thesis for growth around this business was that we had so much white space still yet in the market for our products and our brands. And the operation that we had built could only scale to a certain point. It was going to be tapped out and maxed out. And to modify that, that can certainly include investment by our private equity partners, but it also includes a great leader who has actually seen an operation that has scaled beyond where we had been. So this is why I use that example of what got you here may not get you there, because this was a perfect example where she had just really maxed out on her, the things that she had seen, the experiences that she had, not her capability to learn and to grow. That's an important distinction. She certainly had capability to learn and grow, but maybe not as fast as we needed to actually transform. And so it's about speed. It was about speed in this particular instance. And again, she was phenomenal for everything she brought, but I knew that I needed to bring on a new chief operating officer who had been there, done that, and had seen some things and could really put in some additional processes, maybe even had a Rolodex of partners, things like that become really important when you are scaling so fast. And I'll put an asterisk next to this as well. We also have been an acquisitive company. And so we acquired another company, which created a whole level of complexity that overnight doubled our business in complexity and in size. And so that too kind of created this need for a skill set that had been there and done that and had really already operated something at the scale, not only where we were already quickly headed, but where we saw ourselves being in 3 to 5 years. And so that's a perfect example where, we just had to look at a different set of experiences and skills and transition someone in quickly. And it worked out wonderfully for her. Sometimes private equity situations can be a little bit hardcore. People are coming and going. It's been my philosophy that everybody leaves with a really good exit opportunity and off ramp and with dignity, and they're never devalued for what they brought to the company up to that point. And so she retired, and it was a great outcome for her. She retired upon a transaction, another exit opportunity for her, and we moved to another leader.
No, great example. In your case, the operational side proved to be an opportunity initially, but only got more substantial with the acquisition. Jerry, how about you? And one of the key changes that you've made that made a huge difference for one of your organizations.
Well, I mentioned earlier that I'm a product of an academy company called General Electric Company. And in that organization, if you were so blessed to rise to the level of becoming a general manager, let alone a P&L manager, you've learned to appreciate the value of the finance or accounting organization and the HR organization. In fact, my CFO is my right hand and my CHRO is my left hand. Because this 70-year-old company run by a family in Chicago, I'll use the term that Victor referenced, good to great. when I sat in on the management presentation, because I was actually a strategic advisor to Gen X 360 Capital Partners. And so I go all the way back to day one. My assessment was this is a good to great story, except that all the leaders in the company were family. So unless your name was this particular surname, you didn't have a key role in the organization. And what I felt was important was that we take it to the next level. And taking it to the next level meant we were going to grow the organization 60% organically and 40% inorganically. There wasn't anyone on the team who had experience doing M&A, and Ann made reference to M&A acquisitions. And so I had to get a CFO partner. I had to have a right-hand person who had experience in integrating acquisitions, because that's so important as you're building up a platform or as you are simply bolting on, into the organization, if you will. So the top grading opportunity for me was the CFO role, and having specifics in terms of what needed to be accomplished. And I always stretch myself. 3-year horizon. Private equity, it's the nature of it. They're going to hold a portco for 10 years. And I liken it to my experience in GE. I say Jack Welch took 10 years to develop a culture around Six Sigma or Lean Six Sigma. Private equity doesn't have the luxury of that time. So I employ what I call Quick Sigma or Fast Lean. And I look for people who have that type of experience, who can hit the ground running and help me move the needle towards that end.
Excellent. Quick Sigma, I like it. Coined a new phrase today.
I know. And Jerry, I only wish my private equity folks were on the 10-year plan. Mine were all on the 5-year thesis. So that's like 5 years is good. 3 years is great. Like then you're killing it, you're crushing it if we can exit in 3 years with the kind of multiple or beyond that we expected. But 5 years is a base case. 7 years, everybody's nervous, and because they know that the length of time on the fund is typically 10 years. So at year 7, everybody's like, oh, that's when stuff starts really moving fast, and people start to make all kinds of changes if they're still invested and don't see a path at year 7.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely. The enterprise I run today, so this is my second bite of the apple. So the first exit, we did it in 3 years. And I'm pleased to say that I still hold the record within that fund for the best multiple on invested capital and the best IRR. I hope to do that again the second go round. And the whole period has been 5 years this go round. And so it really depends. I've actually sold my business, the business I was running in GE. I sold that business to Apollo. So I've had a variety of experiences as it relates to financial sponsors.
Well, I think the common dynamic that we all can relate to is speed. You're basically on a quarter by quarter ramp up. And I think that's the thing that also differentiates your team, particularly the leadership team. Can they really hold together? Can they really drive continuous growth in the functional areas every quarter? Because the owners are going to want to see that continued progress every quarter. So it's a race to get it done and to create a lot of value in a short period of time.
No, that's absolutely spot on, Victor. I would say buy-in is important. Dwain, you were asking sort of what we look for. The experience that a person brings is important, but I tell people it's not simply making the numbers, it's how you make the numbers. And your style of leadership is important. And you buying into the investment thesis up front is critical. Because if you don't, you really shouldn't come into this type of capital structure. I mean, you can You could go and stay in a publicly traded environment. You could go work for a family office. You could work for a sole proprietor. But private equity or financially sponsored sort of structures, if you will, require people, day one, you bought into the vision and you understand your role as it relates to moving the needle. Now, a lot of people like to joke that we are probably obsessed with EBITDA, but there are other key performance indicators that are important that help you deliver on the EBITDA requirement that's necessary in a financially sponsored environment.
That's a great point. And I think one of the other things that I look for in one of my key leaders is, does this person have an ownership mentality? Because to buy into private equity, you really need to think like an owner. Employees think about their jobs and, kind of coming to work every day and kind of meeting the company's expectations. Owners want to maximize their assets and their cash flow. And they recognize also that there are no limitations. If I can put together a case that basically creates a ton of value for our owners, then I should be willing to do that, and they're most likely going to fund it. So I think it's a different mentality. You have to buy in, as Jerry said, to what this is all about. And that's really about thinking like an owner, from my perspective.
I would agree.
Ownership mentality.
Yeah. I would agree. Yep.
Well, I had two questions, but looking at the time, I'll make sure I get one in, and if we have an opportunity, I'll go back to the other. So if one of you shared that you think with the end in mind and begin earlier, lay out the path to get there. But now that you've actually gotten to the end on, for each of you on more than one occasion, standing at the end, looking back, what might you have done a little bit differently on the motivational or people front? Now that you say, boy, we got here in record time for you, Jerry, and very attractive times for you, Ann and Victor. But, now looking back with the benefit of hindsight, Jerry, I'd like to start with you on this one. Is there one or two things you might have adjusted with that knowledge at the end of the road?
I'll tell you this, Dwain, go with your instincts, go with your gut. And this applies across my 40 years of working in industry and 18 years of sitting on corporate boards. I could move faster on individuals that I kind of know aren't a good fit. Usually I like them, I like their style, and I go back to actually a Jack Welch framework. We had a matrix in GE, and one axis was your performance, and the other axis was your values. Well, a poor performer with low values, that's easy to move on a person like that, right? You're probably not even gonna, you're just not going to relate to them. So you move on them out of the organization. They're probably bad for the organization. A high performer that doesn't have values or lacks the values that you think are important to deliver on, whether it's a single shareholder in private equity or multiple shareholders in a public environment, sometimes a little more difficult because they're performing, they're delivering the numbers, but you don't like how they're delivering it, not the right way. The person who has good values but's not performing at the time, that's a matter of you've got them in the wrong job. Put them in the right job and then allow them, resource them properly and allow them to excel. But for me, it's moving a little faster on the person who's not a good fit. And I'll tell you, after 40 years of working, I knew it. I knew it, and I probably let them stay on 12 months too long. What that does, it also disrupts the organization. Because trust me, if I knew it in month one, the team and their direct reports knew it before I did. So I would say that's an opportunity, even for an old dog like me, DAWG, to learn and continue to develop. And it kind of keeps me fresh and in the game. That's my developmental need. That's my opportunity to move on individuals if they're just not a good fit. Hopefully I could put them in a role that better suits their skill set. But if not, do what's right and tactfully and respectfully move them out of the organization.
No, great point. Ann, how about you as you stand looking back over your shoulder?
Yeah. Well, I can tell you that I'm no exception to what Jerry just shared. And I saw Victor shaking his head. I think we could all say that there was likely a moment in time or several moments in time where we could have moved faster on a particular person and realizing that they just, something needed to change. But aside from that, I'll give another example of something that I've learned, which is kind of the complement to that concept. And that is, with the end in mind, that's all good. We all walk into something with a thesis, and or we develop the thesis. In my case, my private equity partners, they had a thesis for investment, but it was driven heavily by my vision for what I believe the company could do for each of them. And every private equity partner that I've had invests behind a management team because they believe that management team has the vision, rather than perhaps the other model, which is they bring someone in who all of a sudden changes out everybody, because person's new and they change everybody. The folks that I have both sat across the table from and have been very adamant about my company having are those who believed in the team that was on board. Even if I was going to make some changes at some point down the line, they were grounded in the management team and they believed in the management team that existed. So there's a little different spin on it. So my point in saying that is, I also would have realized that the market is dynamic. And I know that everybody knows that at a cerebral level, the market is dynamic, things change, you have to adapt. We all have adapted, or else we wouldn't be on this call talking about what we're talking about, the ability to adapt and be agile. But I would have put people in a couple of key places strategically on things that were future oriented. And what I mean by that is places I could see the market going and that brought a skill set that maybe wasn't as needed to manage the quarter or even the year's EBITDA, but they were really critical for the future of the company. And an example I'll give is, I joined the company, we were on digital platforms, but we were primarily retail based. So we were selling into retailers and we had our own websites and we were operating a really nice business. But I didn't put anybody on the business that really knew Amazon, for example, or the marketplaces that were evolving and really blowing up. And so we're on Amazon today and made a huge pivot to get there for our brands. But we could have been there 5 years earlier or 3 years earlier and added to the value of the company that much earlier if I had brought in a resource who was on that burgeoning platform and really looking at it and really focused there. So it's a balance between, managing your EBITDA for the year, for the holding period, for whatever time period you're looking at, but also being future forward and making sure that you have skill sets on the team, either in the existing people or in bringing in new talent before you get there or before the need really is there so that you can capture the value as quickly as you can.
I love that, Ann. I love that. What I heard you say, and I can relate to it, is investing. First and foremost, investing in people. And I like that your fund said, we're investing in you. And you don't see that very often. You don't. And I've got 4 data points to suggest that. Some of them have, and some of them have not. The other thing I heard you say, and I call it green shoots. And if you go back in my time in GE, and people think GE is a corporation where there's unlimited resources. Well, maybe relatively speaking, but when you're in that environment, I used to get the tough assignment, not the assignment where someone said, hey, Burris, this thing is running like a Swiss watch. Just don't screw it up. I got the turnaround assignment. And you have to learn to be flexible. You have to learn to really use your ingenuity in financing things and developing skunk works. So I've developed this thing called green shoots that I keep away from the EBITDA plan, and I protect it. I fiercely protect it because it's your future organic or maybe even inorganic growth that drives your business. And I like your thought, and this is a new thing I picked up on. So this has been worth my time and investment. I hope people listening are picking up on things, but this leader just got something from Ann, and that's placing a bet on a person who's going to develop something as well. And we really do need to stress that regardless of your capital structure, whether it's private equity held or publicly traded or family office. So I like that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Jared.
Hey, Victor?
Oh, man. There have been a number of things that I could have done a little differently, obviously, in retrospect. I'd say the thing that pops into my mind is I came into a really tough operating situation with one of my companies. My first day on the job, at the end of the day, it was a hard day. One of my board members called me out and asked me, why was production down? And I was like, wow, how did you know production was down? And so the next day, after another hard day, another board member called me up and asked me how I was production down. This is my second day on the job. So at that point, I kind of figured out how they knew. And I realized that this was going to be a lot of work because there were a lot of operational challenges in the company. There had been 4 previous operating leaders in the company in 4 years. And so one of the things you like to do when you can is bring people along who know you and have worked with you in the past, and they're willing to kind of come on board again and go on a journey with you. And I tapped someone who had done an excellent job in another equity event for me as an operations leader, and I brought him in, and he truly turned around the operation in about a year. But as he turned it around, while the results were there, and back to Jerry's theme, the how is equally as important as the what. We got the results, but I didn't see the dedication as much to continuous improvement. He was so much involved. He was such a good crisis manager from one crisis to another. But he wasn't really building a great team, and he wasn't driving continuous improvement. And so I thought I could coach him through it. And I probably stayed with him, for about 2 years. I probably knew enough at the end of that first year, but I thought I could turn him around, and I was loyal to him. And ultimately we lost momentum that year. And so that I would have probably kind of in retrospect said, hey, look, it's probably time to make a change.
So a couple of the examples you guys shared were really on timing to make decisions that you eventually made. So you knew in your gut, I think is a quote from one of you, that this thing is not feeling like it should feel. It's not giving me the feedback. I'm not seeing the momentum. I'm not seeing what I want to see in a way that I know we need to get where we want to go. How do you transmit that to other leaders? Because in your organization, you may have multiple levels in a function, and you'd ideally like them to mirror that behavior as well, to be able to know on their team, if they have, call it 2 levels of leadership underneath them, when they should similarly make that move where, it's probably not a person you may even see in a monthly part of your business. Any thoughts or perspective on how you can cascade that down? I don't know if it's a best practice, but certainly a practice that leads to results. How do you cascade that down to others?
Yeah, well, I'd say in my case, one of the things that I'm doing is I'm working with a private equity firm called Linden Healthcare. They're a large healthcare focused firm. They've been awesome to work with, awesome partners. And we've done some things in terms of just how we approach bringing talent in. kind of making sure that we are really clear on the job description, and we have a scorecard, and there's, we involve Lyndon as well. And so on the key hires, we make sure we do a great job hiring the people that we want to bring in. And so making sure that my team has great people around them. But the second piece is holding them accountable and kind of building kind of value creation plans, that and kind of having the team put together a plan every year that takes us from A to B. And we stay engaged in those value creation plans every week in my staff meetings. And every month we do a deep dive. And when we start to see issues, we talk about people. And so I think it's constantly educating and communicating and aligning with your team around the expectations. And they need to have high expectations for their team as well.
No, great.
Yeah.
I like, and the weekly follow-up is key too. Yes.
I was just going to say, I agree with everything that Victor just said, 100%, because it is, this ability to cascade down will make or break your success. I mean, your executive team, you and your executive team can't be the only ones either aligned or having the vision or being the ones who are, even in private equity situations, rolling up your sleeves. Like, we're not, sitting in ivory towers in many instances. We're really, doing the work. The other thing I think about too, in addition to that, is I think about one of my philosophies personally has been to always develop to the point where I am ready to move out of a job, not the job is ready to move away from me. And so this is one of my own philosophies. And I know it's part of why I am doing what I'm doing today. I have transitioned from the CEO to the chair of the board, is because I knew it was time for me to move into a different role and to actually do succession planning. And so one of the things that does for a team is it illustrates to them. And I was very intentional, not only for myself, but also to the message that it sends by role modeling, that as a leader, part of your job is to develop people to now assume the work that you've done. So if you just stay in there and taking up space forever and ever, that's fine. That's an approach. But in the organizations that I've run, I've been really, really adamant that you're developing the leader that can take your spot. And similarly, my goal is to develop each of the leaders to take my spot. And sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. That's not really the point. The point is, though, that it's the goal and the mission that I have to have someone develop to the next level, assuming that they aspire to, by the way. That's you have to assume someone aspires to do that. But so this whole idea around how do you build a culture of development, of growth, of expansion, of ways that you think about being a part of this organization and continuing to contribute at bigger and bigger ways. That's how I find that is the most empowering way to have the conversation, because then everybody's growing. I like to work on growth businesses, and similarly, I want my people to grow right along with the business. Like, I don't just want the dollars and the EBITDA to grow. I want people to grow and what they're able to do and what they're able to contribute. And so that's how I approach it in a different kind of concept as well.
Yeah,
I love that comment you made about, or that word you used, culture, because I don't think people understand when they come into private equity how important culture is. And there's going to be a culture that you inherit, and then there's got to be a culture that you're going to drive toward. And you can't throw this one away, but you got to make sure the culture you end up with creates an environment where everybody is driving for and aligned for the things that you're trying to achieve. That culture word is really key in the hires that you make and how you operate and how you hold everybody accountable. And back to what Jerry talked about, making sure they're doing it the right way. All those things tie together. But culture, without culture, you're just your people kind of working on a project together.
Absolutely. A term I use to describe what Ann articulated so well is a blocker. A CEO can be a blocker. A CFO can be a blocker. A lot of times blockers are embedded down in your middle management level, and they can become a virus. They can become a cancer to allowing individuals in the organization to feel like they can ascend to the highest levels in the organization. I want to go back to your question, Dwain, and my only addition I can make to this, it feels like Victor and Ann and I are like finishing each other's sentences off like we've been friends for like 50 years. It's really cool. I think it's really cool. But my preamble to my goal or strategy deployment is a process that I use that's called new leader assimilation or new team assimilation. And I'm gonna give a shameless plug for someone who I've used successfully in all my exits. Her name is Cecilia Carter, and she does it very, very well. Her firm is called Strategy Chick. Look her up on LinkedIn, Cecilia Carter. And she and I worked at GE together. So we have that background, but she's moved on and, you know, she's done successfully, had a successful career, I should say, at Starbucks and at PepsiCo, and she's brought that skill set. That's where you get the alignment. That's where you get the buy-in. And sometimes that's where you determine I've got a skill set gap and I need to address this. And that becomes then, I almost think if I could change anything you asked me and I gave you an example, one thing I would change as a guy who's been in industry for 40 years, in my new leader assimilation, I should bring my search firm there so they could see firsthand what skill set I'm lacking, whether it's hard skills or even soft skills, how I want to win, winning right, not just delivering the numbers, but how you go about doing it. I don't know, Dwain, maybe I'm creating a product for you to go out and deliver for DHR.
Well, I was just thinking that sounds like an opportunity here.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Get yourself a good search partner. I 100% agree, Jerry.
Like
get yourself a good search partner.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I must say, I've not had an opportunity to work with any of you in that capacity yet. So for the audience, just wanted to make that part clear. We do have a couple of questions that have come up. I'll grab the first one from Kamante. He says, each of you were sought out by PE firms. And how did you decide which firm you would actually work for? And what was most important in making that choice? Start with you, Ann. You had the big smile.
Well, I will tell you. So someone once told me that if you've met one PE firm, you've met one PE firm. And what that means is that every PE firm is different. And so you really have to, there are maybe some themes that you can try to bucket people into, you know, depending on what stage they are and all kinds of other things. But the point of that statement is you really have to go into a conversation, not just as someone who is selling yourself as a potential leader that they want to hire, but you're also a buyer. And you are a buyer in a conversation that helps you understand, do I feel like I can sit across the table, good and bad times? Because trust me, you're going to have both. Can I sit across the table from the individuals who I am interviewing with, if the case is you're interviewing or you're just talking about a role? And could you see yourself doing that for 3 to 5 years or 7 years or 10 years even, you know, depending on how the business goes? Because if you can't see yourself in conversation with those individuals from the very beginning, it's going to be a bad outcome. Right? Honestly, I'll just say that. And I won't say that with 100% certainty, but I'll say it with 99% certainty. It's going to be a bad outcome. Because your private equity partners are incredibly important to your success, and they have to support you. I talked about, you know, I've actually stayed in my seat while my private equity partners have changed. So each time along the way, I had to think about who did I want to sit across the table from for the next leg of the race. And I evaluated them, every one of them. And I told, you know, if I was sitting across the table from them, I was very clear with them about, you know, here's how I think about my role as a CEO. Here's the culture I want to build. Here's the vision I have. And if they sparked to it, I was like, okay, we're on the same page. If they didn't, then I was like, well, we need to find some other investors. We need different private equity partners on this exit and this entry. I mean, And that was, I very much threaded that needle through the process and was very vocal about that. So it's not just when you take the first role with a PE firm, but if you find yourself in a position like I have, where you are bridging and you're jumping over to another PE firm, you need to be really selective and make sure that it's like a marriage in a lot of regards. You able to communicate and able to really feel like you are respected and valued, and likewise you value what they're bringing to the party. So that was, and by the way, my big thing was I'm autonomous. If you are hands-on, I'm not your girl. I'm just not your girl. You want to be in the weeds. Now you can ask me every day how my business is performing. If I'm off track, you should be like in my face. But if I'm delivering what I said I deliver, I need autonomy. That's my thing. So if we're on the same page, we're on the same page, as an example of one of my principles and beliefs.
I'm going to finish off Ann's statement. I'm a firm believer in exactly what she says. I lead by exception. If you're making your numbers and your KPIs are green, the only conversations you're going to have with me are, how can I give you more resources? How can I help you? And sometimes that is just get out of your way. I'm going to use the example because I've worked for 4 funds, and I'm obviously not going to disparage the one that I like the least. So I'm going to talk about the one that I had the greatest amount of success with, and that is Gen X 360 Capital Partners. Why? Because the founder of the fund was my boss at GE. He's known me for 35 years. Conversations that I would have with him would be 2 minutes, 2 seconds, versus, let's use the example of the fund I'm not going to name, that wasn't a good experience for me. It would be hours that I'm trying to explain what we're trying to do. Part of the lesson learned for me was, out of some 30 portcos that they had, only 4 were manufacturing-based concerns. So they just didn't understand how a manufacturing-based business runs. And I spent an inordinate amount of time educating them as such. So now here's my phrase that I use, and I'm going through an exit process now. It's 4th time, right? I usually say it like this. Well, the 32-year-old Jerry Burris probably would sit quiet and not say much. But the 62-year-old Jerry Burris, let me just tell you what he thinks. I talk in third person, but they get what I'm saying. I've been around long enough. I've experienced enough. To Ann's point, I also want the experience to be a good experience for me and a good experience for my team. And if I have to spend an inordinate amount of time educating the fund on what we're doing and why we made the decisions we make, then I'm losing my ability to go out and make an impact in the market. So you got to know, and it depends on where you are in your career. I get it. If you're in your 30s, you may not feel like you have the self-confidence to push back. But if you're experienced leaders like Victor, like Ann, like myself, you should be pushing back. Don't go through a bad experience, because if it's not a good fit, if your gut tells you this isn't going to be a good experience for me, they don't share the same vision that I have for this enterprise, and I'm probably not going to get the support that I need in order to make it happen, back away from it.
Good point. I want to get one last question in. And this is, they're looking for best practices on an integration. Their CEO, Maurice Markey, and he's in the process of an integration. So Victor, any key learnings that were contributing to successful integrations for you?
Yeah, I'd say you have to be very intentional about doing integrations. I don't think you can afford to wait. I think you have to have a plan and a strategy and ownership of the integration. And I think you have to be personally involved as one of your key initiatives that you're trying to execute in the business. I tend to be a student of strategy deployment, as Jerry is, and all the skills that you learn in Lean and Six Sigma. And so what we do is we've created a PMO, and on integrations, just like we have cost and growth PMOs or or projects, we have integration projects, and we manage those weekly. We have someone who owns that integration, and we hold them to metrics, and we make sure that the actions are getting done. And so I think you have to kind of treat it as something that, you know, there's a plan. We're going to go from A to B. Here's the time frame. Here's the person that owns it. Here are the milestones. And then, are we hitting our milestones?
Thank you so much. Suzanne, I think we are nearing the end of our window.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much to you, Anne, Jerry, Victor, for sharing your insights and expertise with us today. And thank you to everyone in our audience for joining us and for the thoughtful questions and engagement. We weren't even able to get to all of your questions, so thank you so much. There will be a recording provided in the coming days, so hopefully you can review that as well and share that with people. As we've heard today, creating and sustaining high-performing teams requires an intentional focus, and we hope that you're leaving today with some new strategies and inspiration to elevate your teams to new heights. If you'd like to continue the conversation or have any further questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to Dwain or myself at DHR Global. Thank you again, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you, everybody.